Okay, welcome everybody. We are happy to resume our monthly Q&A with our favorite enology specialist, Denise Gardner. And we do have a few members on the call, and I think Denise has gotten a couple of questions by email in advance. So I am going to turn the hosting over to Denise and let you guys take this away.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to start by talking about a question that came in regarding tannin concentration in hybrid wines, specifically. Oh, lost my question. Just going to read it for you. Let me just reload here for a second. Uh, Specifically looking for if Outlook wants to work today. Thoughts on hybrids and holding added tannin. So this is a topic that comes up quite a bit in regions just like Illinois, that where people are growing and producing hybrid wines, specifically hybrid red wines. That tends to be where the focus on tannin retention and perception is a topic of discussion. I want to say there's not a ton of research on this. Cornell University is the primary place where I know they have looked at hybrid red wines and have looked at tannin retention in purely varietal, 100% of that variety red wines through the duration from berry to finished wine. Unfortunately, their studies are only evaluating the analytical component associated with tannin retention. They haven't had studies that I know of on the sensory perception, irregardless of those analytical results. In general, there's kind of always been this feeling amongst winemakers that it's very difficult to produce a big, really bold, vinifera equivalent red wine from red hybrid varieties. And I think that's kind of probably where this question is coming from. There's three questions as to why that may be with regards to tannin retention in hybrid red wines. The first is that, are there lower concentrations of tannins or polyphenols in hybrid red cultivars as fruit? Basically, does the fruit contain less tannin than, its vitivinifera cousin? The second would be, is there tannin in the fruit, but it becomes very difficult to get out of the fruit during our, harvest operations and during primary fermentation? And the third would be, is there tannin, of course, in the fruit, but then it's somehow lost or not retained during the winemaking and wine production processes? Or is it kind of like a combination of all three? Cornell looked at this several years ago. I think the first time I really heard about it, I was still with Penn State, so it had to be um, much prior to 2017. I think their last publication on it's from somewhere around 2015, 2016. And essentially, what they found for the hybrids they looked at, keeping in mind they're looking at New York based hybrids. This is going to include things like, I have a document here with some of the varieties they looked at. They looked at Baco Noir, Leon Milo, Foch, Maréchal Foch, Deschanac, and Noire and Coro Noir. So the conclusions that I'm giving you are based on those hybrids, and they do kind of come into this realm of saying this could be hybrid variety specific. It could also have regional impact in theory, but this is the extent of what we know about tannins and hybrids during the winemaking process. What they found was, compared to the Vitis vinifera grown in New York, those red hybrid varieties on average had some lower concentrations of tannin in the fruit. Now, some varieties did have more, but on average, the concentrations were less. So we're starting off with a lower concentration of tannin in some of those red hybrid varieties compared to Vitis vinifera grown in the same region. The second thing they found was there was really good extraction associated with the tannin um, coming out of the fruit into the must and then existing there during primary fermentation. But the loss of tannin became the primary issue through the winemaking process and then later wine operations. Those first big drops in tannin, again, this is analytically, the first big drops were associated with primary fermentation. And then another very large drop at the end of primary fermentation in association with a lot of lees binding. Now, the primary reason behind this is not necessarily the lees itself. It has to do with the protein concentrations in hybrid varieties. So hybrid varieties in general are bred and produced for very specific growing conditions, things like disease resistance, weather resistance, pest resistance. Those traits are in hybrid wine grape varieties because of these proteins that they produce. Those proteins, just like the tannins, are also extracted during the winemaking operations, harvest operations, winemaking through fermentation, and then they may exist in that wine through the duration of um, aging and then later bottling. Their primary conclusion was the higher concentration of proteins in the hybrid grape, the lower retention of tannin, essentially, with that variety. And even with exogenous tannin additions, and it's kind of like a whole different segment in of itself, because again, lots of variation in the mixture for the exogenous tannin. It's not 100% tannin. If you buy tannin from any supplier, it's not 100% polyphenols or tannin. There are other things in there, but we often don't know that blend. So it's not just about adding the tannin, because that tannin also got lost during the winemaking process in association with these hybrid red wines. Again, some hybrids had better retention than others. And again, this is focused on the analytical, the actual concentration of tannin from start to finish. But in every case, more than like not even 50% of the tannin from what the fruit had at the start to what was in the final wine was retained. So there could be best case scenarios associated with individual hybrid varieties, but in general, the tannin loss is much more excessive than what we see in Vitis vinifera varieties, even grown in the regions where they're grown alongside hybrids. So the one thing they did say too is if you were going to make an exogenous tannin addition, probably where you add this is going to be different than vinifera. From a winemaking perspective, we are often pushing exogenous tannin additions during, crush and primary fermentation to get them integrated and stabilized in the wine. But because those greatest losses with protein binding are affiliated with crush and primary fermentation, and then in between primary and malolactic fermentation in association with the lees fallout, probably for red hybrids, you want to shift where you are adding exogenous tannin into a later, closer to maybe bottling situation. And again, that doesn't mean you're going to get a lot of retention. It just means that you'll get more retention compared to if you were incorporating those tannins in general at the beginning stages of winemaking. I will also note that when they were doing their tannin additions, they far exceeded the rates of allowance. And so even in those concentrations, those dosages, there still wasn't very good retention. There have been secondary offshoots of this project in terms of like looking at removing the proteins, because a lot of winemakers came back and said, can we remove the proteins? And the short answer is no. They've tried some different mechanisms for protein removal. And so far, nothing has um, actually reduced the protein concentration enough to provide really good tannin retention. So what does that mean for red hybrid winemakers across the country? I think the first thing to consider is, yes, this is just, New York fruit where this comparison has been made, but it does pose an argument for other states to start looking at some of their other hybrids and regionally characterizing what might be in their hybrids, because we don't know. It's a guess. We are extrapolating the information from this study and applying it to every other region in the country that is growing and producing hybrid red wines. So if that's something you would want to know for your state more specifically, mimicking this kind of project would be beneficial for the state of Illinois. Um, and there are obviously hybrids that were not evaluated in this study that might have either better retention analytically or better retention analytically and better perception associated with astringency and just overall mouthfeel for those red wines. But when it comes to kind of how I look at it as a consultant when I'm working with people across the country, I don't really push tannin additions for hybrids because I feel like it's a loss of money often for the producers. So if they have the money to spend, fine, it's not going to hurt anything. But if they are looking at cost cutting measures, then tannin additions are usually where I'll start cutting for the red wines. And I will note that there are some hybrid red wines out there where I have noticed that there's at least a better perception of mouthfeel. Um, so the ones that I'm thinking of do actually include Noire, which was included in this study. Oftentimes, the issue with Noire is where it's grown. It also has very high acid retention, so that can be a challenge from a mouthfeel perception. Um, and then the other one that does really well is Petite Pearl, which is often grown in the Midwest. That seems to have relatively better mouthfeel. I don't know if that's specifically related to better tannin retention, but the mouthfeel perception is there. And that those are just anecdotal observations based on tasting red hybrid wines.
So it sounds like we can save a little money with that fermentation of tannins.
I think so.
And
I
then maybe
mean,
play with for the finishing and then but note that it's some I guess for lack of a better term, gonna fall out.
yeah, I mean, that really is what's happening. It's binding and falling out, or they're becoming inactivated in perception. I mean, I think I wish I had like a here's a trick I would use for everything. I do think, and again, this is anecdotal, this is just based on my observations from working with some people. I do think there can be structurally better integration of tannin that's perceivable. Again, I don't know what this looks like analytically, but perceivable with use of oak barrels specifically. And oftentimes it's usually associated with Hungarian oak, as opposed to our traditional French and American oak. I don't know if it is just related to the fact that it's from Hungary, and so the chemistry of the wood is different, or if it's related specifically to like the seasoning process, if there's higher retention of the tannin in those oak barrels compared to what we do with American and French. I'm not sure. There's a variable there, but um, I have noted that sometimes that can be helpful from if you wanted the astringency, sometimes we can get that. It's not consistent, but sometimes we can get that from barrel aging. I would just caution because the thing that I see a lot of winemakers going wrong with barrel aging and red hybrid wines is holding wines in barrel way too long. I mean, the practice is to basically follow whatever is the perceived practice associated with, California cab. And oftentimes, because these hybrid wines don't have the tannin and phenolic structure associated with them, um, that vinifera do, you can get more rapid oxidation or loss of aroma and flavor components, which is just as detrimental, if not more detrimental, than just lacking tannin to be, that tannin perception to begin with. So I would just, what I really like to do in these situations is I often will counterpoint with an oak barrel specialist. That's just how I operate. I would like to get the input from somebody who has more familiarity with how I'm treating my wine as opposed to like just, throwing darts at a wall essentially and making a decision. So when it comes to aging red hybrids, I am often consulting with somebody in the oak industry to kind of guide me with what I should be looking for and how long that wine should be in that barrel from that producer on average. I don't think winemakers do this enough. I really don't. But in terms of like exogenous tannin additions and oak adjunct additions, when it comes to red hybrid wines, I have not seen a lot of increase in perceivable tannin, so perceivable astringency. If we are going to add oak adjuncts or oak alternatives, it's more for flavor integration as opposed to a mouthfeel and flavor change.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't know, does everyone have their chat? I can send, there's like a summary from Cornell that I like to reference. They just, put the main points from some of their studies on one of their research summaries. I can send that to Lisa to distribute to everybody, so at least you have that information. You can look up the research papers. They're available. I have the thesis sitting right here. You could read the whole thesis on it.
I'll make sure to get right on that.
In our free time. It's only a few hundred pages. Good question, though. It's a huge, I mean, unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of like new information since these studies have come out, but it still is a really wide gap. Share with your friends. It's a gap in knowledge and association with red hybrid wines when it comes to making them. And I think that gap often leads to a lot of like you're making wines a certain way, and so you just apply it to your red hybrids without really thinking about how it could impact the overall cost of that wine and if it's actually changing the wine in a positive manner. Good question. What else do we have going on? It's been a while, everyone, and I'm just gonna post I'll post the Cornell summary here if you want it right now. Otherwise, I'll send it to Lisa to distribute it to everybody. And it looks like it is from 2015.
I don't have anything other pressing questions. But that just getting a couple wines ready for bottling, and after adding the tannin, just noticing a perceivable difference from the initial addition. So I appreciate knowing that I'm not crazy.
Yeah, also watch it over time too, because sometimes it does, especially, well, anything you add, whether it's sugar, tannin, gums, they all have like, even oak alternatives are this way. They all have their like extraction and immediate effect, and then they have the stabilization effect. So there's going to be some time for those things to integrate and essentially stabilize with everything else that's in the wine. And through that time, you may notice no sensory change from start to stabilization, or there can be very dramatic changes and from a sensory perspective. So, I mean, it's worth, if you are looking at this, it's worth noting, and especially separating out your perceptions from but by cultivar. I actually, if you still have the memberships, I have a table that I use. It says 4 barrels, I think, but you can use this for anything really. It's like a quick chart to just write down really quick perceptions so you can monitor changes over time. Let me just link it in here for you. You're welcome to download and use it if you have access still.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I use it quite a bit. Like if somebody has a barrel program, this is absolutely what I'll use quickly as we go through the wines, like barrel by barrel, and I'll just make quick little notes. Like you'll see I think it's just detailed out like means that sensory perception's not there. And then I range from like plus, 2 pluses, and 3 pluses, meaning very intense on the 3+ side. But it's a quick visual to show you like, I don't know, how to blend things together, I guess. That's how my mind works anyway. Wine blending. So I didn't highlight it for barrels, but that's what I use it a lot for, or oaked wines. So I'll put that here in the chat. It does look like Iowa also looked at some hybrids here, so I'm going to put that in the chat box as well. And I'll send this to Lisa. This was looking at addition rates of exogenous tannins in red hybrid wines, and pretty much echoing what Cordell had found. And there is a push, from these universities, like with suppliers, to make different dosage rates for hybrids, but that research still just hasn't been done. I mean, the hybrid market compared to the vinifera market for these suppliers is very small.
Yeah, I've been kind of waiting for that a little bit too. Scott does a good job with different yeasts and things for hybrids, but not so much the tannin additions.
Yeah, I know.
I did think of something else that
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about, and it was something you touched about last year in regards to kind of the bottling schedule and the additions at different times.
Mhm.
And you were highly recommending that sorbate is added towards the last, if not before the last filtering.
Mhm.
And am I correct in
Yeah,
remembering and why?
yes, you have choices with sorbate. And in some cases, there is some variation depending on who you purchase sorbate from and the form in which it comes in. But for the most part, I would say most of my clients are adding it before they start filtration. So I probably went through this last year, but my general bottling protocol is pretty standardized. So we do like bentonite fining if that wine requires bentonite. And as we are coming off bentonite into a new receiving tank, that is when we'll start making some of those pre-bottling additions with intention to start filtration within like 5 to 7 days. And so sorbate, I will typically add when we are also adding SO2, which is usually going in right after sugar additions if there's going to be a sugar addition. So it would be racking off a bentonite into a receiving tank. If there's sugar, the sugar goes in, and then we'll make the SO2, final SO2 and sorbate addition to give it a much longer, you know, 5 to 7 day window before we start filtration, which is going to be something like plate and frame, lenticular. Crossflow would be different. So if you have a crossflow, you have to do something different.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
But yeah, in general, a lot of suppliers will say you could add sorbate there before you start plate frame or lenticular filtration, or you can add it at the end of those. For crossflow, I am pretty sure you have to add sorbate after crossflow. But don't quote me on it. I'd have to go back and look at that. You would probably be safer adding it after crossflow.
I've trying to do that and then just know that if it's getting close to bottling to add and then filter
Yeah,
and bottle.
the
But
issue with adding it earlier is sorbate has about a year and then
okay.
that's it. So like when you add it, that clock starts ticking. And for some wines, you won't even get a full year.
So that's the good to know for the why, because sometimes it's easier if it's
Yeah,
in a milk tank to add the sugar while I got the agitator and then add the sorbate. But if I'm not close to bottling, all right,
yeah,
time's ticking on the sorbate.
yeah. And sorbate is just like SO2. So the higher the pH, the less effective. The lower the pH, the more effective. The other thing to consider with this too is so let's just like table crossflow because crossflow has some pretty specific needs. But the reason why too there's like that 5-day waiting window goes back to filterability. So every time you add something to the wine, you are changing the colloidal, which is just like lots of different soluble components structure in the wine. So this is everything, right? Proteins, tannins, color, sugar, whatever is in the wine is all a part of that, for the most part, the colloidal chemistry. And that requires time to change. When you add something to the wine, what we often see from a turbidity standpoint is an increase in turbidity. That may not be visual, but from a analytical perspective, you'll see that initial increase in turbidity. And then like all the things start to kind of like break apart and find their little area in the wine, and then the turbidity goes back down. When that turbidity goes back down, that's when like filterability starts to become okay. So now we can run the wine through our first filters, and then you go through this process of breaking down pore sizes with your filter, from larger pore size down to smaller pore size, because you're essentially like temporarily breaking apart a lot of those colloids, all the things that you added, all the interactions that are going on in the wine. You're breaking those apart so that it can then go through an absolute filter. That is really the technical reason on why a lot of my bottling operations are very much like, you're going to do this, you have this much time, you're going to do this, you have this much time. Here's where you add this, here's how much time to wait. Because what I'm essentially doing is making sure I'm not adding something to the wine that increases the turbidity. And now it also inhibits filterability, meaning it can't easily get through your filters. It allows the wine to actually kind of stabilize into where their interactions are going to be. And then we start breaking them down through that initial filtration, plate frame or lenticular filtration, and prep it for absolute. And then once you're done with absolute, bottle shock is the time it takes for everything to come back to where it was before you started breaking it apart through filtration. If that was confusing.
No, you went through it in great detail last year, so it's just
Good.
A great reminder, and it has altered my steps as approaching
Has it
bottling.
helped?
Yes, I've
Okay, well, that's
noticed um, it's a lot easier to filter,
yeah.
and especially that final filter, I have had no issues um, on bottling day.
That's awesome. I just put in, I think this month, when was, no, March. March blog, my blog post was on this very topic, kind of breaking down filtration and why you need to do certain things and when you need to do them and how that timing matters. Because for the very reason that you just said, Peggy, I'm trying to reduce everybody's filtration problems. And filtration is very complicated. There's a lot of technical stuff going on, but we don't talk about it because it's not fun to talk about. Um, so anyway, this blog post pretty much explains what I just said, which is when you add things, you cause problems. I think I saw a filtration specialist say like it's like if you imagine the wine as the room that the party's in, every time you add something, just imagine like more people coming into that room and like interacting with other people in the party, and eventually everybody kind of disperses and does their own thing in the party. That's what the colloids or the components in wine are doing. They like get added and they congregate and they have interactions, and then they kind of like figure out, like, some people want to be over by the fruit punch, some people like just want to chit chat, whatever. Once they're happy, that's when we send it through the filter and kind of break it apart so that we can then really prep the wine for getting through that absolute filter.
Fun analogy.
I mean, it was fun. I was like, you can see the party, right? But yeah, I don't know. It really provides that argument for don't add sugar and then filter the next day kind of thing. But the same is also true for sorbate, SO2, your enzymes, tannins, gums, et cetera, et cetera. And if you are using crossflow, just know that the order that these things go in changes, because some crossflows are very susceptible to clogging or damage in association with certain products that we might add towards the end, right before we filter the wine. So if you have a crossflow, the best thing you can do is always reach out to the supplier of the product. Like, let's say it's a tannin or an enzyme or even sorbate, and say, when do I add this? I'm going to crossflow my wine. And if it's a real reputable supplier like Scott Labs, Lafor, Enartis, uh, BSG, etc., they will be able to tell you that answer. That's a good question. I understand why you want to add it in the milk tank. A lot of people do. And you can. It's just you're losing time with the sorbate.
Mm-hmm. Or if I can, if I'm still fairly close to bottling, if I can put it in there for cold stabilization and add the sugar before I start cooling it down.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing with sorbate and SO2 too is it's not just time, it's also efficacy. So if you have higher populations of microorganisms in your wine, the efficacy goes down. And I don't really know what that looks like. Like, if you add it early when you have higher concentrations of yeast and bacteria in your wine, does the efficacy of that sorbate remain as strong by the time you remove everything? You know what I mean? By the time you remove all the microorganisms. That part I don't know, but I do know that the higher your populations of microorganisms, the lower your efficacy is of your preservatives, SO2 and sorbate in this case. Actually, that filterability post that I just sent you guys, which everybody can read, it's open content. There's a couple things in there. So the bottling checklists are in there if you still have access to my website. We went through those. I think, Peggy, that's what you're referring to last year. And that's broken down by the type of wine that you're making. And then there's some links at the very bottom to some references and resources. There's a webinar that's really good. I think every winemaker should have to watch Filtration Fundamentals. It's a really great introduction into filtration. And then ETS and Scott Labs, they also have some pretty good information on filtration. So the Scott Labs doesn't have a link, but if you search the title, you will find it. That's because they create like if I put in my link, you won't be able to access it most times. And then the ETS one does have a link to it if you wanted to read that. They're a little more technical, but they're worth it.
The filtration fundamentals webinar, that's yours? Or that was each?
No, that was hosted by, I want to say, Virginia Tech and taught by Maria Peterson from Scott Labs. And if you like that one, there's a podcast episode that Maria Peterson did that is even more technical, but filled with like a lot of really good information about filtration and how complicated it is. What else?
That's very helpful. Rosario's a neighbor of mine, and I think he may have joined you before, but Rosario, Denise is a wonderful resource for us to just kind of touch base and either say, all right, I got a problem. Why do I have it and how do I fix it? Or what are, what are good, protocols for different aspects?
Yeah, yes, I've been listening very intensely about tenants, and we use them quite often. But one thing that you did say is that do not add tenants at at the end of your filtration. Should be in the middle or in the beginning, and let it slowly dissolve. Well, it's something that I gotta tell the boys. I gotta tell them how to do that. Well,
Yeah,
I've been really enjoying your conversation, and
thank you.
I'm a little bit too old to hit all that stuff in my head. So
It's okay.
I want to get them printouts. How do I get them?
We want to get some what?
The printouts that you
Oh, the
just talked.
printouts.
Yeah.
So I have I've been putting them in the chat box here, but I'm going to send them to Lisa to distribute to everybody, all the Illinois members.
Oh,
Are you, so you should be able to gain access to them.
that's a phenomenal. Thank you very much.
Of course, yeah. I always think that I guess knowledge is power, right? So if you have the context as to why a recommendation is being made, then maybe you'll be more likely to remember it. And then it helps us, kind of change our winemaking practices over time. So I like to make sure that we have the references and provide people with extra information if it's interesting to them.
Well, it is. It's eye-opening in a way. I've been making wine for a long time, but from the days I first started making wine to today is completely a different story.
Yeah.
Completely a different story.
I mean, it's an ongoing learning experience.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. You knock your head against the wall a couple of
Yep.
times. You have to throw away some batches that you were very upset about, but that happens.
It happens to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you for joining us, Rosie.
you're very very welcome. Thank you.
No, thank you. One thing I did forget about the hybrids, um, was, and this will be controversial. So for those people who are fully against this, I'm sorry. Um, you you can get sensorial change from red hybrid wines if you blend them with vinifera, and that sensory change is often more pronounced if you use riper, aka West Coast fruit vinifera. Again, I know there are regulatory um, regulatory challenges with this from states to state. So I don't know where Illinois stands with this specifically, but that utilization of West Coast fruit or West Coast wines that have also higher concentrations of phenolics compared to what we have surveyed in the East, like cab from the East versus cab from the West. Cab from the West tends to have overall higher phenolic concentration compared to cab from the East. So again, Illinois is kind of in the middle. I don't know where your cab specifically would lie on that spectrum, but my guess is you're probably more affiliated with the East as opposed to the West. So when you get that higher concentration, that riper, darker fruit from the West Coast, you can see a structural change, obviously, or taste a structural change in those hybrid wines. And that is a tool that more and more winemakers are using for different wines. There's obviously regulatory decisions to look into here, branding decisions for your winery, and then also, being able to reproduce that result year after year. There's considerations for that as well, but that is something that I kind of forgot. Analytically, I have no idea what that looks like from a tannin retention standpoint, but sensorially, you will see an impact in that.
Yeah.
Rosario, are you making hybrid wines?
I am, but I'm also I bring in California wines also. And I do blend.
Yeah.
I do blend with the hybrids. I like to have, like my Petit Pearl, I don't touch it. It's Petit Pearl,
Yeah.
100%. But my Frontenac, the Leon, the Foch, those, they get the little tweaks of California.
Yeah.
Just because they are, um, they don't have the mouthfeel that you usually have from
Yep.
the and that blend of that makes for me makes a better wine, completely better wine.
Yeah.
And it's the and that's been an experiment. I'm ongoing experiment. So and every year we try to make our same wines the same that we've sold, so we have consistency.
Hmm.
We try that, but sometimes we'll go off the chart and make a little something else.
That's okay.
That's typically what happens at Forget About. That's the name of our winery.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody laughs. That's the fun part about the winery.
That's
Everybody
great.
laughs.
That's great.
Yeah, we have been expanding here. We've been doing tasting room has got we added right onto the tasting room, so we got a bigger area. We got a bigger deck now, and we're doing some other things too.
That's great.
Yeah, it's fun. It's been fun. But
Should be fun.
right now, I got my two daughters run this place,
Okay.
and I'm sitting back, and their husbands are involved, and we got employees also. So that's
Well,
what.
then you're in good hands.
Oh yeah, I'm 100% retired. Or retarded. I'm sorry. I'm not retired. I'm retarded. But that's what it did. It took a long time for me to do it. My passion was here. I retired from my previous job that I worked, and I started a vineyard. And it's been
Nice.
25 years.
Nice.
Nice. This going. And Peggy's been sweetheart. Every time I get into trouble, hey Peg, I need some help,
Oh,
and she's
good.
always been there for me too.
There's a good community in
Oh
in
yeah,
this industry, so that's great.
yes. I think everybody likes to learn off each other, not to steal anything, but to learn.
Yeah.
It's a difference.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the way it is. Well, thank you for all the information, and I just
course.
wanted to embellish a little bit about and brag a little bit about. Forget about it.
Thank you.
You're
I do want to
welcome.
check with Karen, Lacey. I see there's somebody else online. Just see if there's any other questions anyone might have.
Not for me. I just love listening. I learn a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Lacey. Facebook.
I hear silence. Are we about to wrap up, do you think? Or do you, Karen Swiney from Arpeggios on the call. Has she weighed in with anything yet?
I don't think so.
Karen, speak up if you have any questions.
I don't really have, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I clicked on something and lost the whole thing just a while
Oh,
ago.
shoot.
So no, I don't have anything today, but I'm glad that this is being offered again. So
Awesome.
it's
Okay.
great to learn.
Right. And for those of you, like Rosario, it's so good to see you. I get to be in Galena in June for Corkless because we're taking over the management of that from Nywig. So I'm looking forward to being up in your neck of the woods again. It's been quite a while. So, but we do record these sessions and we do put them in a YouTube playlist that's available only for members. We have a link to that playlist that we'll share out with everybody. Denise and I have been playing around with using AI to develop meeting notes for these sessions as well, which we'll share out. And then anything that she's promised to you guys all in this meeting, we'll share that out as well. So it's good to see so many people on this call and taking advantage of things. We have not determined the balance of the schedule yet for the rest of the year. And I think Denise might be prepared to get the calendar out and get some dates scheduled
Right
here
here.
with me. Yeah. At the conclusion of this meeting. So, lots of things to be looking forward to. And we certainly appreciate all of your efforts, Denise. We know that collectively we're all getting to be better winemakers because of
Great.
our involvement with you. So, well, not
Great.
me. I'm a really good wine taster though.
And just remember too that everyone's welcome to email me like the question that came in about hybrid wines. You can email me even if you're not here. I'll answer the question, and that way you can either refer back to the recording or the AI summary, and just get that answer. So if there's ever something that pops up in your facility and you're like, I really wish I had someone to ask this to, just send it my way. Just put in the subject line that it's for the Illinois Q&A, and I'll save it and I'll answer it.
And you know what, Denise, that might be a good thing to shoot out to our members as well with, and maybe I can do a link so that
Sure.
your subject line is always going to be the same, and that'll be easier for you to
Yep.
find questions you need to respond to. And maybe if you wanted to record a little video, just encouraging people to do that, because I think sometimes there's questions that people they want to ask, but they're afraid to ask because
Yeah.
they think, yeah. So that's a great way. Although I think, I think everybody's like, there should be no shame in there's no dumb question. That's what my dad always used to say. But, if you don't want people to know it's your question, using that email option would be
Oh yeah.
great.
And I don't tell people who said it unless they say it's okay to share.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, everybody has their own individual comfort levels, and we want to be cognizant of all of that. So, anyway, but it sounds like you guys had a really great discussion, and it's good to see so many people on the call today.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
You too.
Thank you.
Before we start making this,